Cyber Smart Dealers webinar. I just wanted to let you know straight off the bat that as per usual, we're recording the session. So this will be available to you afterwards. If you registered or attended, I'll send you a link of that recording so you can watch it at your leisure later on or on YouTube and share it with your colleagues if it's something that they might be interested in. Today, we've got Brian Hay again with us, our resident expert from Cultural Cyber Security. He's going to be running through the topic of what every board member and executive needs to understand. So usually we say if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand and I'll let you have access to your microphone for a little bit, or you can put it in the chat or Q&A function and we'll get Brian to answer it for us. So Brian, I'll leave you with everyone now.
Great. Thanks very much, Ash. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for giving up your time. Now, let me just share my screen. Include sound. If someone can confirm that they can see the screen okay?
Yep, we got it.
Wonderful. What every board and executive team need to understand. Now, folks, I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm not going to try to insult anybody's intelligence. My background, of course, is a significant number of years in law enforcement and fighting these scumbag pieces of criminal filth. But the truth is we need everybody on board at every level of the organisation to achieve that outcome of prevention, crime prevention, cyber security. It can't be achieved just with mere technology. And we've got this massive evolution of knowledge gap within the country, and you just have to look at perhaps the political landscape to understand. And I'm not being nasty or critical. I'm just sharing the truth. So hopefully you'll better insight to the challenge after today and how to strategically conceptualize proactively. How's that for three words all in a row? Consideration of the cybersecurity challenge going forward. But before I continue, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country and acknowledge the traditional owners upon the land on which we meet. And I pay respect to elders, both past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this call today. You know, we've got to understand when we look at the challenge of cybersecurity that it's constantly moving, totally dynamic and is global in nature. And that's what this slide represents. It never stops and it's constantly evolving, and our data is traveling around the world at incredible speeds, and we've got to try and deal with it. And that's what we are confronted with. And one of the fundamentals, and I apologise if some of you have heard this before, is that most of us have never had the why of cybersecurity answered to us. Why cyber continues to grow, why government cannot stop it, why law enforcement can't stop it, why good cybersecurity is a 24/7 proposition, why good cybersecurity starts at home, but more importantly, why it's everybody's responsibility at every level within the organisation and in the community. Because the simple truth, folks, is the cyber threat is continuing to grow. I saw some references just this morning that cyber was now worth over $8 trillion a year in terms of cost to the global economy, and they expect by 2027 it's going to be triple that. So that's the expectation of how this significant crime problem is going to simply become more significant. And I think whilst we deal with it at that perspective, they call it cybercrime. With the global conflict we have going on, I can see the nation state sponsored issues becoming more prevalent, where lifestyles, communities, the whole supply chain of business being disrupted, not for the purpose of money, but for the purpose of ideology, terrorism, and state-sponsored interests. Now, I wish I could say all good things. It's not gloom and doom, and I think that's something to report. The sky is not falling, but it seems like it to many, I suspect. What we can do is, to me, good cyber security is a risk management conversation. Good cybersecurity is about delivering and driving business outcomes. It's about reducing risk and growing people. And it's how we embrace that and step forward and get away from this notion that it's simply a technology issue. I go into a lot of organizations, I speak to a lot of boards, and to be fair and not critical of anyone, I'm yet to speak to a board that I say actually gets it. And some people on the board will get it. But when I talk about get it, it's how you holistically view this challenge. And where it shows up to me time and time again is that organizations go on a digital transformation exercise and they've got all these wonderful programs of work that are going to increase efficiencies, increase productivity, increase profits ultimately, reduce costs, blah, blah, blah. And it's all through digitization of their environment and what I call the expanding digital footprint. But rarely are those projects, have they brought cybersecurity to the table? Because as you expand your digital footprint, you're expanding your digital attack surface. You are increasing your digital vulnerabilities. You are increasing the size of your target in the eyes of the cyber criminal. So as you expand your digital footprint, which I encourage everyone, of course, to do, but you simply partner your security thinking from the get-go. Don't try and add it in at the end of the journey. So the more we digitize our environment, the more risks we then carry to do a digital exercise. And as a consequence, as we expand that digital footprint, we turn up the volume on the risk dial. And that's what I don't see enough discussion around. And it begs the question, if I asked you right now, what is your level of digital dependency? And by that, I mean, how could you operate your business if you lost all digital capability tomorrow? Have you ever stopped to think about it? Have you ever thought about doing a digital trail audit or a digital audit from the time a customer or a client or a business partner or a vendor or someone in your supply chain, from the time they walk virtually or physically through the front door, what records are kept? Where are they kept? How long are they kept for? What is added to those records right through the life cycle of that relationship? And then how much it is digital, and then where is it kept, hell, and all those other questions. And if you lost access to the internet tomorrow, could you operate? Now, for example, I ran a desktop exercise recently with a client, a desktop exercise around the digital environment on a ransomware attack. And there was a person from the IT department there, and asked him, okay, this is the situation, this is unfolded, what are you going to do now? And they said, oh, I'm going to follow my incident response plan. I said, okay, where's that? He said, on the file server. And they opened up the laptop, and I said, sorry, all your systems are down, you don't have access to it. Now what are you going to do? And they never thought of that before. And we'd become so used to it. It's just part of our thinking. We think everything's there. But what if it's not? And that's what we need to prepare our resilience in our business structures to be able to continue to function in the business and with the absence for whatever period of time is necessary of digital resources. So we still, we can't always drive the car. Sometimes it's not available. We still got to learn how to walk, sometimes jog. We're seeing more pressure on directors come forward, and it really became, talking to some directors of companies, there was a little bit of apathy around how much cybersecurity they had to worry about, because under the legislation, the Companies Act, there was nothing specific raised. And then there was a matter of a ruling in the High Court a couple of years ago. It was ASIC versus RI Advice, a financial group. And the High Court ruled in favour of ASIC, and that said that RI Advice had failed because they failed to institute appropriate cybersecurity measures and remedial actions. And they ruled that directors have two primary responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity. First and foremost, you must manage your cybersecurity risks. And secondly, you must build your cybersecurity resilience. But pivotal to this, folks, is how can you be expected to manage your cybersecurity risks if you do not first understand the threats? And that is probably the most telling, poignant issues, is how many of us truly understand the extent of the cybersecurity threat today from cyber criminals and nation-state actors? And it's a valid question. And let me tell you, it's you just can't say, oh, well, it's a big problem. It's a very complex beast, but there are fundamentally some simple steps that can be taken to remediate that challenge. I'm not saying it's a simple issue. We've seen, of course, and what I'm saying is no offence to any lawyers or solicitors present on the call, but we are increasingly litigious in this nation and also globally. And class actions are becoming more and more common. One of the first ones, and I'm mentioning this because it explains the new thinking in some of the courts in the legal system. There was a company called Athens Orthopedic in the United States, and they got hit with a ransomware attack. And in that process, what they did, they paid the ransom. They got access back to their data. The data was exfiltrated. The crook said, oh, no, we'll delete your data. First thing, you never believe the crooks will never delete your data. Anyway, they had to, by virtue of the HIPAA legislation, advise the patients, the clients, that they had lost their data, and they did so. So then subsequently, there was a class action by a number of those patients to take legal action against Athens Orthopedic. It went to the first courtroom session, and the courts ruled, no, we're throwing it out. There is no detriment caused to any of the plaintiffs. The matter doesn't hold weight. They then took that on appeal. Again, the courts ruled, threw it out on the basis no detriment had been caused. Last throw of the dice, they took it on appeal again. Now, in the interim, by this time, the criminals had started to trade and sell the data that had been stolen from Athens Orthopedic. This time, the courts ruled that because the data was in the dark web, that there was a clear intention to cause a future detriment and allowed the matter to proceed. The matter was instantly settled, and I think each plaintiff walked away with about 500,000 US. Now, this was very key for cyber criminals because this was the dawn of their awareness that by exfiltrating data and holding the victim to ransom, they could bring pressure to bear, not just of inability to function, but of lawsuits. And of course, lawsuits have continued to go on. And that's why today, as we saw with Medibank and Optus and the like, they didn't actually encrypt all the environment, as you would see normally in a ransomware attack. They said, hey, we've got your data. If you want it back, you've got to pay us millions of dollars. And the lawsuits themselves are now expanding. It's not just the victims whose identities were compromised, but it's also the shareholders are suing the board and the directors and the like. And I think Medibank's got about 5 current lawsuits as a consequence of its breach. Now, I call them the trilogy. We had Optus, then Medibank, then Latitude, and it saw over 30 million Australian identities compromised and so much data loss and identity documents and the like. And it raised a number of issues. One, of course, was data retention. How long is it necessary to keep data for? Why are we keeping it? It raised the issue of data privacy, and there was a lot of debate around the penalties aren't big enough. Data sovereignty. Do we even know where our data is? You know, you go back 10, 15 years, data sovereignty was a big issue. And what that means is that data belonging to Australian citizens must remain in this country. Right to be forgotten started to emerge. We haven't seen it in legislation, but I think it's something that I expect and I hope it will come into this country in the future. Now, the right to be forgotten basically says, well, okay, if you did a silly thing or you made a mistake, entities can only use that. Google can only use that, for example, that information for so long. It has an end of life, and they've brought it into Europe in a couple of years ago. And it's something that I'll see will be on the horizon. Otherwise, folks, we're not going to be able to elect a politician in the next 20 years because everything they did as a silly youth, as a kid, is going to come back and bite them on the bum when the media get hold of it. Document validation. How do we validate that that's an authentic bank account, or that's an authentic identity, that's an authentic driver's license? Encryption. Must we have it? Should we have it? Where do we have it? On the move, when it's, the data is still at rest. Zero trust. About 18 months ago, the United States federal government ruled and mandated that every US federal government agency had to adopt a zero trust strategy for their cybersecurity, and they had 4 years to implement it. We haven't, I'm not going to go into zero trust and what that means, but it's basically believe no one. Honest disclosure. If you did pay a ransomware, should you have to declare it? If you did have a data breach and it doesn't quite fit into the legislative notifiable data breach interpretation, should you have to declare it? And of course, ransomware payment declarations. So all of these things have started to emerge. And a lot of this stuff is going to fall back on the executives and to the boards and the positions. And we don't have all the answers yet. There is a lot of debate, but I can see all of these things continue to percolate away. And eventually, I have no doubt we'll see more of this enshrined in legislation, ever increasing the regulatory burden of reporting and compliance. And of course, I've always said many times that if you give our politicians a problem, there's only one way they know how to solve it, and that's either, there's two ways: throw money at it, or introduce new legislation. It's cheaper a lot of the time to introduce new legislation. So we saw the penalty go from 2.2 million to 50 million for breaches of the Privacy Act. Interestingly, when you look at the notifiable data breach, the OIAC in Canberra, the Office of the Information Commissioner of Australia, since the legislation came into effect in February 2018, there has not been a single prosecution. So it doesn't matter, does it, if it's 2.2 million, 50 million or 500 million, if no actions are taken. It's purely hypothetical. And I'm not saying we should be prosecuting all these people, but if there was a gross negligence present, well, I think it's going to be coming, they'll be looking for the right target, I suggest. So as a consequence of everything that has happened in the past 2 years, folks, there is this growing impetus, and the politicians will get more pressure on them, and legislation is going to be where they sit. And if you look back what's happened more recently, APRA has introduced CPS 234 for the banking, superannuation and insurance communities, and it is quite an arduous process to go through. We've seen the banking executive accountability regime. We've seen changes to the security of critical infrastructure legislation, increased focus by ASIC, who the rumour has it is looking and considering a similar model to APRA. Directors' liability is coming under scrutiny. As I said, the High Court perhaps has taken care of the Corporations Act by setting a precedent of what is expected by directors in that ruling. I expect within 5 years, work health and safety will actually include the safety of employees in their home, and also that it will include cyber safety as part of work health and safety. And I think we can see greater scrutiny about privacy. Quite frankly, I ran an executive roundtable in Melbourne 2 days ago, and I posed the question. It was all about a thought leadership exercise around privacy. Now, if I asked you, and if you could just throw in the chat now, if I asked you the question, do you think privacy is dead? Would the answer be yes or no? If I ask you the question, do you think privacy is relevant in the same way? Well, here's a better question. Should privacy be redefined? I'd be interested to see their general thoughts. Now, I can share with you around the table people within the cybersecurity industry and various organisations. Everyone accepted that our privacy has been compromised. You know, it doesn't exist the way it used to sit with us. Okay, but even then, it's a little bit romantic, if you like. Many people don't know that you could go to any public library, pull out the electoral rolls, and in the electoral roll, if you've ever looked, it's got your full name, your date of birth, and your address. You remember the electronic or the white pages? Used to, as a police officer, I actually had to pay money to maintain a silent number. So it cost me for my privacy. So we've never been as private as what we would have liked to have thought. It's just perhaps the volume of data that exists and it's so readily available is in different dimensions as it once was. Now, I just want to touch on one other point that I normally include in one of the other slides, but I'll make it separate. And it possibly doesn't affect people on this call directly, but one thing that's come into legislation, a lot of organisations, in states and territories, is industrial manslaughter. Now, industrial manslaughter basically says that directors and executives can be charged with industrial manslaughter, criminal offence, and risk jail time if a life is lost or serious injury to a person in the workplace. And there was a recent incident with Elon Musk back in 2001 when one of his robots on the production floor went a bit awry. So what if someone had in a mining pit, for example, driverless autonomous vehicles, and a hacker got in and changed it, and the truck turned right when it should have turned left, and it ran straight into 3 dongers where 20 staff were sleeping, and it ran over them and killed them. So what that's doing is, because go back, folks, to my talk about our digital dependency, and many would have thought, oh, industrial manslaughter's got nothing to do with cyber. It actually has everything to do with cyber. There aren't too many environments these days without a digital connection. And so I'm arguing we've got to think in different ways, because convergence is here and now. It's not something that's going to happen. It already has. You know, when you start looking, Ferrari have had some problems with cybersecurity. And it's been speculated in a report by White Hat Security that automotive industry is becoming a favourite of cyber criminals. And the last 3 years has seen a 225% increase in cyber attacks, which is quite extraordinary. And it's now projected that the automotive industry will incur losses of up to $505 billion by the end of this year attributed to cyber. I don't know where they get these figures from. I haven't gone back through it, but these are the numbers that are being postulated. So some of you may have seen this slide before, but if not, I think it's important to just position ourselves and understand what we do and understand what the criminals do. The criminals are very big on collaboration, convergence, and working as an entity, as a group with a united purpose. We tend to operate in isolation. What's in it for me? We don't see ourselves as a member of a global community as such. They have a global focus. We look generally through the world, or through our world, with a local lens. We're myopic in our environment. They're united in their intent and they support each other mutually. We tend to ask, why should I get involved? What's in it for me? They have great agility and willingness to experiment. We tend to stick with what we know. How many organisations say, well, go and try that, but if it fails, it's your tail on the line. They understand the value of intelligence sharing. We don't tell people. We're embarrassed, reputation, brand damage, or it could be the simpler case of knowledge is power. The criminals focus very much on quality control. At best, we do an audit once a year. They have a business-like approach, constantly look at the return on investment. We look at security as a cost center. What do you do with cost centers? If the liability alongside the balance sheet, you want to reduce them. What if we looked at security as an investment? They focus on targeting people. we focus traditionally on security technology. How much money do you spend on security technology every year? How much money do you spend on preparing your people to take the best advantage of that technology? Okay, it's really interesting. And so it begs the question, is cybersecurity today a people or a technology conversation? Now, when we look at the data breach statistics, and this is the one that's just recently come out for the end of last year from the OAIC, Federal Privacy Commissioner, data breaches were up 20% pretty much. Biggest reporting sectors were health, finance, insurance, retail, Australian government. Health is still and has been the #1 reporting sector every period. But this is, to me, the more intrinsic slide. System fault. These are the causal factors for those data breaches. System fault, 3%. The IT community in this country is doing a cracking job. And quite frankly, generally speaking, the business community in this country have invested well with their IT and have done a good job in supporting them. So the IT system is only being defeated 3% of the time. Human error, that's a physical human error, sending the wrong, say, patient file or client file to the wrong dealership where certain information was viewed by eyes not authorized to see it. Malicious or criminal attack, that was where the human was defeated at the keyboard. Now, since these statistics have been garnered or gathered since February 2018, system fault has never been higher than 5%. The human error has always been 97 to 95%. And we thought this was a technology challenge. The World Economic Forum cited that 95% of cybersecurity issues are traced back to human error. So it would appear that our statistical data around our cyber breaches is completely consistent with the findings of the World Economic Forum. So I want you to stop and think for a minute, just for a moment, of awareness versus culture. Now, if I asked you, did you want to build a cybersecurity aware workforce or a cybersecurity aware culture, what would your choice be? Now, there's probably about 10,000 people across this country today will be issued with a speeding fine. All of them are aware they shouldn't speed, but they did it anyway. So culture changes behavior. Awareness may provide some insight, doesn't necessarily, rarely does it change behavior. Are you a compliant organisation or do you want to be a high-performing organisation? And these are the differences and the choices we need to start thinking about with our workforce, because our workforce is our greatest vulnerability. 95% of your cybersecurity risk sits with your staff and yourself. That is the biggest risk. The statistics, the data, the evidence is absolutely crystal clear. Okay, 96 to 99% of all cyber attacks launched today target people first, your people first, to get into the organisation. If you're going from the purely risk numbers, that's your highest risk. Now, what's interesting is we go into organisations and we do cultural diagnostics around their cybersecurity culture. And I'm just checking, yes, it is completely anonymised. And we actually break down to measure organisational culture into these different things such as cyber awareness, security policies, attitudes, subjective norms, behavioural norms, threat appraisal, self-efficacy, conscious care. And it means you can then start to see where you've got issues and challenge or remediate and prioritise your actions, because you're dealing with an evidence-based decision model. Now, I'm going to share the next one of the areas we go into subjective norms. And this is really, really important, okay? When we look at subjective norms, we talk about policies, but I want you to take to the third bar from the end. My manager regularly discusses information security with me. 3.6. And what we find in this country, that tends to be the lowest score in every cultural diagnostic we've ever done. Okay. and that doesn't mean that they're the part of the executive. They're just the line manager up. As a detective superintendent, I could go and give a lawful direction to any one of my staff and they would do it. But if I wanted a more lasting direction, I can assure you that their sergeant or their senior constable who supervised them had far more influence over their day-to-day activities and the way they thought and behaved than I ever did. And this is one of the gaps we have, is that managers and leaders at all level of the organisations aren't embracing. And one of the reasons is they don't know how to either, because they don't understand the why. The executive tend to get certain strategic briefings from a variety of sources, during their careers. The lower end may get cybersecurity training because it's now part of an induction program to a point. But what we have is that big gap of people who may be in the organisation for 20 years and they sit somewhere in between. They haven't had the benefit of neither. So that is one of the big gaps I suggest in your organisation, is how do you get your line managers on board with the program? And one of the things, if you actually applied your environment, and we have a maturity model assessment, and we look at behaviours and cultures from 4 main categories: reactive, compliant, improving, high performing. So do you react when something goes wrong? Do you try to meet the minimum standards of what you have to do because of regulations and legislation, so you're compliant? Or you're constantly seeking to improve, or do you want to excel with high performing? The best score we've ever had is compliant. Some have gone into that improving space, don't get me wrong, but we've never had an improving culture yet. So I think there's huge opportunity, but to be fair, a lot of organisations haven't even started thinking about it. And as we know from culture, it has to be initiated and driven, led from the top. And to be fair, one of the reasons why they will never achieve improving or high performing is because the cyber awareness or culture model is not being owned and driven by the executive and the board. Just because you mandate a phishing program once every quarter, that just won't cut it. So it's just the organisation has to own the challenge of cybersecurity. So if I ask you, what's your human risk score in your organisation, what would your answer be? And if any would be, I don't know. And to be fair, folks, I don't think there's an organisation in the country that could answer that question at the moment, because they're not considering it all that much. And if you said, well, well, we think it's going to be X, we're pretty good because we've only got 7% click rate on our last phishing simulation. Trust me, I could pull that apart pretty quick, but that means 7%. So if you're 1,000 strong organisation, that's 70 people who clicked on your last email that could potentially open the door to let someone in. Of course, it doesn't take 70, it just takes 1. And ransomware, probably the biggest disruptive cyber attack threatening organisations today. 91% of all successful ransomware attacks start with a phishing email, which have been targeted to a person. One of the most recent ones was St. Vincent's Hospital in Australia. They compromised an end user, got all their credentials. They then exploited a remote desktop exercise, and they used that to pass MFA. MFA is fantastic. I call it the seatbelt of cybersecurity. But no technology as a point of singularity can defend your environment. It has to be a holistic solution. Then they stole the data. Now, why don't we lock these bastards up, someone might say, excuse my language. Well, they didn't lock them up, but there was a big song and dance. Lockbit ransomware gang was the most prolific, is not the most prolific ransomware gang in the world. And the FBI and the US Department of Justice came out with a big song and dance. I think, the AFP might even jumped on, everyone was jumping on the bandwagon, so yeah, we took down Lockbit, we've dismantled them. Well, it worked for about 3 days. Within 3 days, Lockbit were back up and functioning. By the end of 2 weeks, they were fully operational. So the difference that was made it was a 2-week hiccup. Most organizations hit by ransomware today, it's a minimum 3-month hiccup. Okay. And even we've seen changes in the ransomware gangs where crooks will come back and say, hey, I know you've been hit by that Lockbit ransomware gang. I can get access to the system. Pay me $190,000 in Bitcoin and I'll hack into their system and delete their data for you. So you know, guaranteed all your data's gone. So I actually suspect, I don't know, but this has been undertaken by Nigerian crime gangs because they are brilliant social engineering experts. The dark web, folks, continues to grow. It's not going away, as evidence. I think Lockbit probably provides the best example of that. I'm not going to take you up. Many of you would have seen that my journey into the dark web. Interesting, we're seeing ChatGPT and AI, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, being adopted everywhere. Already there's over 225,000 compromised ChatGPT credentials up for sale. So whatever we do, whatever time we dip our toe into the water, we must always be thinking of security. Now, it's interesting. It's such a broad and vast international community now, the dark web, that we're seeing nation-sponsored actors go in there and start to seek donation and funding operations. Killnet 2.0, which is a nation-sponsored to take activity group of entities to take down different organisations they don't like, are now seeking donations for their efforts from other cyber criminals who don't want to do it, but will support their cause. Another really important issue to consider from an organisation perspective is your third-party supply risk. Who's got access to your data that is a contractor? Who is a contractor that's holding, might be your HR records or doing your pay runs? Have you ever stopped to think, well, what is their cybersecurity portfolio look like? How secure are they? Have we asked the right questions? American Express just suffered a massive compromise through a third-party data breach. If you looked at the latitude, that was through a third party that they got breached. So we have to extend, once we've established our own environment, the security around it is, okay, who else are we vulnerable to through no fault of our own, but how vulnerable are we because another organization who holds our data or we allow into our system to do certain functions, how secure are they? Folks, the number one threat to you, to every one of us as individuals, as family members, as community members, and of course for our organisation, is phishing. This is the greatest and largest single touch point by the criminals to us on a daily basis. Now, by the time you don't see it in your work environment, because your work environment might employ good security standards, as I said, a security email gateway that filter out most of your phishing attacks. But I'd just like to point out that just because there's a seg there, a gateway filter, doesn't mean everything is stopped. In fact, things will always get through. So we always must be trained up to be able to defend ourselves against phishing, and never more so than, of course, in your private world. Now, if I wanted to breach an organisation, I would target the staff, I would profile them, look at who I wanted to go after, then I would profile their children, and I would go after their kids. Not because I'm evil, but I'm pretty sure that you would more willingly click on a link or download a file that was sent to you on your children's email system than you would from a stranger, an ugly bloke like me. Think of the logic behind it, and that's what I'm saying. It's the whole process is going to get more serious. Now, I just want to do a couple of exercises with you just to point out how incredibly important it is that we develop phishing defenses. Can you read that out loud to yourself? A bird in the bush. Read it out again. A bird in the bush. Now read it one word at a time. A bird in the bush. Your brain auto-corrected. It said it saw the, but but it realized it didn't need the second dust, so it put it out. You didn't even have to cognitively think about it. How many F's can you count in the sentence? Finished files, the result of years of scientific study combined with experience of years. How many F's in that sentence? Some people will say 3. Some will say 4. They're the two most common answers, but there are 6. Of course, the connective words are the words of, OF. There are 3 ofs. Now, you can see, I'm just demonstrating this, as your brain operates quickly, you're trying to be efficient with what you do. It's easy. Your brain autocorrects, it makes mistakes. What we haven't developed is the discipline to teach our brains how to look for anomalies in senders' email addresses. So if it purports to come from autoindustrysales.com.au, and I didn't realize that the O in auto was actually a 0, not the letter O, then I've just clicked on a fish. And so that's why we've got to develop more effort around phishing detection skills. And from cultural diagnostics we've done, most people would rate themselves 7 out of 10. So there's not a lot of confidence out there in the community. Everyone thinks, oh, everyone knows about phishing. It's the most successful attack weapon because we're not confident in it. We're not perfect at it. And where that comes from a business perspective in terms of risk is understanding who are your very attacked people. In most organizations, they're going to be board members, executives, and finance and HR people. Okay. Are they getting special treatment because they deserve it? They are your most attacked people every day. Ask Toyota, where they got caught up in a $37 million business email compromise fraud because a member of the finance team clicked on a link and transferred money as they thought they were being instructed to do. What we've actually got to do with our staff is, I used the term zero trust before, we've got to build into our organizations zero human trust, which simply means you validate everything before belief. And it is going to get more difficult, but we've got to start thinking about it and doing it now, because the attacks will actually increase. They're not going to dissipate. And we need to understand what can make us a target today.
Dag Fien. Dus gewoon. Ik zie een school tegen Antwerpen.
Ja,
Insecten.
alsjeblieft.
Ik voel 2 insecten op je rug. Kan dat?
Ja, vlinders.
Slovenie?
Ouais.
Een moto. Oranje. Pas erop. Zenit.
Oui, bien.
Je hebt een vriendin. Julie de...
Ja.
Een boeiend liefdesleven. 3, 4 zelfs.
De 4e, daar zwijg ik meestal over, dus dat weten niet veel mensen.
Hoe is mijn spiersgeur? Maison rouge, balkon, blanc. Ja. Ik zie geld, ik zie transacties, maar kent je rekeningnummer van buiten? Ik denk dat ik het wel weet. Er staat wel negatief op je bankrekening.
Ja?
97. Last month, you spent €200 on alcohol. Vorige maand €300 aan kleding gespendeerd. 8.
Ja.
5. Voor een huis dat van eigenaar gaat veranderen. €795.000.
Ja, eigenlijk.
41.
Ja.
Is dat juist?
Ja, dat is juist. Oh my god. Oh nee. Ah, dat is, ik weet niet hoe eng.
comes back to what I said right at the beginning, have we all been compromised and what's our position? And we got to accept now that so much is out there, but what people don't understand is how much we engage with things like social media every day, put so much information about us on the world stage. And that allows the criminals to take advantage of social engineering attacks. That is the clever manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust. And it begs the question, if you please indulge me, is your identity compromised? There's over 20 billion identities circulating the dark web. Now, Ash will confirm for you, if you've done this before, please do it again. I up until only last week, I had 6 data compromises registered against my email. Now it's 8. So it's important to keep going back and regularly check. Just go into that website, Have I Been Pwned? It's operated by an Australian cybersecurity professional here in Queensland. And you can just go into QR code and put in your private and work separately email address and see how many times those email addresses have appeared in some of the large data breaches, and therefore that data is being traded in the dark web. And it comes back to that point I made. How can you manage the risk if you first don't understand the threat?
I think, Brian, I've just done it for myself, and great news. No, I haven't been pawned recently, but for everyone that's on the call, I think one of our executives did this last time they were on the call and had over 10 or so, 20, like I think what you mentioned before about executives being targeted was, on clear display when that happened.
Yeah, thanks, Ash.
Yeah.
And I think the record that of any group I've had was 27. And if you scroll down, folks, and that was a security person actually. If you scroll down, it'll tell you where those breaches were. So you've got to assume that in that breach, say for example, it was LinkedIn, you must assume they didn't just get your email address, they also got your password. We know 80% of people admit to using the same password on multiple sites. So it's a dangerous practice. Please use a password manager. Another threat we need to consider are insider threats. Staff members who complicitly or non-complicitly do the wrong thing. Interesting, if we look at the most recent Federal Privacy Commissioner data, 11% of the data breaches were actually a malicious insider, not accidental, malicious. And we are starting to see the criminals. One of the growth areas in the dark web is the recruitment of insiders. So they may be preying upon people who put out a negative post. They don't like where they work. Their boss is a bugger and they're not happy. Perfect for the picking. You want to earn some extra money, get back at your bosses. And then once they recruit, they're hiring them out to other criminals to do bad things. So the insider threat, just not that long ago, Vickers Singler was a part of the cybersecurity team. And he then started hacking into the systems of hospitals, pretending they'd been hacked because he wanted to increase his notoriety. This is a bit like the arsonist, the fire starter who wants to be the hero syndrome, come in and save the day when all goes wrong. Sometimes it's all simply about the money. Here's one that was advertised in the dark web. I have access to company revenues, names, and emails of their vendors. I also have their accounting, finance department emails. They're looking to partner up with a cyber criminal to commit ransomware. So the truth is they're there. And now I'm not going to bore you with it, but I had a lot of time for many years working, fighting corruption and the same behaviour, the elements of presence of influences there. Normally they're ticked off with their job. They feel the job owes them something. They have a lifestyle they can't afford. There may be a drug or gambling addiction involved, and they're in a position of access to the right data. Something to be mindful of. Again, the importance of building strong cultures. What can we expect in the future? Well, the future is here. Artificial intelligence. I just want you to watch a couple of videos and tell me what you think.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, For instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or how about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet.
Second youngest son. He's suggesting it came out of nowhere. What we subsequently learned is it may have come from the former president or his legal team acting in bad faith. This is a deepfake example of what is possible with powerful computer and editing. It took around 72 hours to create this example from scratch using extremely powerful GPU. It could be improved with more computing time, but 90% of people cannot tell the difference.
I'd like to meet the 10% that can tell the difference. It's quite extraordinary. Now, this is especially with our very attacked people, they are going to be approached with more video, audible messages and video meetings that will purport to be perhaps even from yourselves, good folks, or someone in position of authority to give a direction, to tell them what to do, such as what saw the loss of $35 million to a gentleman when they received an instruction from their CFO who had had their voice cloned, and they, following that direction, sent $35 million to the crooks. More recently in Hong Kong, a finance worker again actually participated in a number of meetings with the finance team, different members, up to 6 people on a call, and every one of them was live. They spoke, they engaged. Every image was deep fake. Every voice was a clone voice deep fake. And we have got to start putting in and thinking about our processes of payment, how our invoices and systems work, because it is getting more of a threat, and it's going to explode. I expect in the next 12 months we're going to hear some real horror stories. So AI is not going anywhere, folks, and a lot of organizations are starting to develop AI policies, but policies by itself won't cut it. You know, I was talking to someone the other day and I said, well, when it comes to AI, I feel we're at with AI where we were when the internet came along 25 years, 30 years ago. Everyone was encouraged to be a part of it, but no one ever thought of consequences. AI has many positive benefits, but we need to try and be proactive and think how we manage it appropriately. So I'll just ask you to reflect upon yourself, purely yourself, and ask yourself, well, do you know enough about this cybersecurity thing and the whole, the digital world that we live in? Do you get regular training? Do you know how to defend yourself online? I'm talking about you at home. Do you know how to manage your social media and your family's social media? Are you asking the right questions? And when it comes to asking the right questions, from a board perspective, are you asking the right questions around strategy and governance, risk management, incident response? What technologies and control questions? And I'm not talking about getting into a deep dive into tech, just asking the right fundamental questions. Education and awareness in pursuit of culture, vendor and third-party risks. Do you know what questions to ask? Do you know how to interpret the answers? Even better still, because let's be honest. I'll give you an example. When I first got into fraud and cybercrime many, many years ago, the head of my forensic computer team came in and I said, "G'day, Pete. Nice to meet you. Sit down and please tell me, how can I help make you successful? What do you need to be able to build the best forensics team in the country?" And he started talking. I said, "Pete," after a few minutes, I said, "Could you just do me a favor, mate?" I said, "Could you just go outside for a minute, walk back in and come back in and start speaking English?" And he laughed. He took it in the right spirit it was meant. He laughed. He says, "Boss," he said, "I'm sorry." He said, "They call us dolphins." I said, "Dolphins?" He said, "Yeah, we're highly intelligent, but we can't speak English." So, but there is that, always has been that interpretation, that language divide. Now, folks, I've actually done up a series of questions you could consider. I've shared that with Ash and she'll make it available to you. So I'm not leaving you hanging on these things. But if you can get those basic fundamentals right, you're going to be a long way better off. I've also, because I know many people on this call are in small businesses and they don't have the support of the larger IT infrastructure networks of larger businesses. So I've also provided source for you some security fundamentals for small and medium businesses, and Ash will send those out at the end as well. But irrespective of the size of your business, everything I've said, folks, it's going to get more personal. We need to develop our own personal skill sets. And if I could just indulge me, get the fundamentals right. Okay, always use a virtual private network when you connect. It's not expensive. I'm not endorsing Surfshark, it's just the one that I use. Always use a password manager, much easier, simpler, and safer. Golden rule, never click on a hyperlink in an unsolicited email or SMS, and you'll never fall for a phishing attack. Now, I know many of you have to answer the phone because of the nature of the business you're involved with, but I never answer a phone call if it's a number I don't know. If it's important, I'll leave a message, I'll call them back. And everywhere you can, excuse me, always enable multi-factor authentication. You know, I call it the seatbelt of cybersecurity. It's absolutely imperative. Never, ever, for convenience, turn it off. Okay, so for a reason, yes, it does take an extra 6 seconds, but so does putting on a seatbelt, and you wouldn't think of driving anywhere without a seatbelt today. And I think we are all compromised. That's my view. I can talk that ad nauseum for another hour if you wish. So as a consequence, please consider getting a credit ban and have your having your identity monitored with one of these agencies, credit rating monitoring agency service, because that means when your name has been compromised and someone attempts to take out a line of credit in it, you'll be notified about it so you can block it. Okay, information security is everybody's responsibility. I think I've thrown that down your throats. Apologies if you've found it, if I've gone too fast or I've overwhelmed you, but we're on a journey, and I thank you very much for your time. We can meet this challenge. We just have to understand how to embrace it. And we've done a pretty good job so far in terms of getting the technology right. If we take a holistic view, the difference that we can make in this country is massive. And let me be frank, the criminals don't just target Australia because we're Australians. They target us because they can make a lot of money out of us. Remember I said they always look at the return on investment. If we can make Australia twice as resilient as other English-speaking nations, they will go put their efforts there. Why on earth would they come to Australia to make $1 million when they can go to, say, the United States and make $2 million? It is as simple as that. It's fundamental economics. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, as Brian mentioned, I'll send out those couple of resources that he's developed for you guys, along with the recording link, and that'll all come to you in an email, either later this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. If anything pops up between now and then that you can get a chance to ask now, Brian's details are also at the bottom of that email, so you can get in touch with him directly if you've got any follow-up questions. But otherwise, thanks everyone for your time. We'll announce the next one as per usual soon. And thanks again, Brian, for your presentation.
No worries. Thanks, Ash. Thanks, everyone. And please do not hesitate to reach out if you have a query or I can assist with anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye.